So it's getting into that time of year when fluke fishing is really starting to pick back up, and I was out on the water the other day and I missed a few fish on a fluke, and it got me thinking about how I like to rig flukes and some of the different techniques that I do to change up the fluke fishing game and get more bites. That's what I want to do today, is break down how I go about rigging it other than a stereotypical EWG hook, and some of the tips and tricks that I do to get more bites on a fluke. So let's dive into it. So it's no secret that a fluke catches fish all across the country, largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass. It doesn't matter, but there is some secret tips you can do with a fluke that really change your game. And one of the first things that I want to talk about is everybody rigs it with a standard EWG hook. They Texas rig it. It works great. For largemouth, it's your bread and butter. You don't have to worry about it. But what people don't think about is when a fish eats that fluke, what you have to do is you have to take that fluke, and if it eats it head first, in order for that hook to penetrate, you have to turn that fluke 180 degrees all the way around, or 180 degrees in order to get it to hook. And a lot of people miss fluke fish because of that. Because if you're catching smallmouth and spotted bass that have a smaller mouth, a lot of times they eat it really, really aggressively, and it'll even be sideways in their mouth, and you miss out on a lot of opportunities, and you're like, man, that fish crushed it. How did I miss that fish? And one way that I like to rig it to avoid that is with a nose hook. So what I do is I take a screw lock, an owner screw lock, screw it into the head, and then I use my favorite drop shot hook, which is a TK 150, and it's an open exposed hook now because you put that screw lock into the nose, put your hook through the screw lock, and that hook pivots so much easier. And especially with it being exposed, you get a higher hookup on those fish that crush it but eat it goofy. You know, even if that fish eats it sideways and you set the hook, you still have that exposed hook and you're still going to get those fish. Works phenomenal with smallmouth, spotted bass. You can rig it on a spinning rod to get super far casts with it. I like it on a 7.2 medium heavy fast action spinning rod. I'll have everything linked down below just like I always do. And it really just changes your hookup ratio with it. Another way that I like to rig it is instead of rigging it with a typical EWG hook, I rig it with an offset worm hook. And instead of rigging it normal with the back up and rigging it through the back, I flip it upside down, because then what you do is you use the belly of this bait as a weed guard, and it actually prolongs the life of your fluke. So now you don't have to worry about texposing it on the backside where that back gets all ripped up and you end up having to throw it away just because you can't texpose it anymore when you're fishing it around brush. Now all I have to do is tuck it into that belly, and I get a lot more life out of my fluke and more bang for my buck, and it's even more weedless. And when you push on it, you get a lot more exposure with that hook. So that's another great way that I like to rig it. But let's talk about some of the baits and the action of those baits now. There's 3 that I like to throw. Just 3. I like 3 for different reasons. The all-around go-to is that Zoom Super Fluke or the Super Fluke Junior. Everybody knows those things are fish catchers. They have great plastic. They have a good sink rate. They stay up when you want them to stay up. You can get them to go down if you need them to go down. And they all around work great. They have great colors. Doesn't matter. But if I'm fishing for fish that are chasing bait and really blowing up on bait, I like that Z-Man Streaks, because it has that high floatability with that plastic and that elastic plastic where those fish really can't tear it apart. I can really keep that bait up on the surface and keep it skipping. This works great for spotted bass in the summertime, your herring style lakes, or just for smallmouth early in the morning when they're blowing up on bait. We've all had it where you're throwing your fluke out there and your fluke gets all bunched up because you're throwing a zoom and the plastic starts to get worn and you bomb a cast and it falls right up on the hook and it never works out right. So that's when I like to go to that Z-Man Streaks. And then another one that I like to throw when I'm fishing deeper water and I'm really wanting to get a nice shimmy out of that bait, really trying to trigger those fish, is that Strike King Caffeine Shad. That sucker just has a faster fall rate, has that nice shimmy that you really don't get with a lot of other flukes. And so that's when I like to go to that Strike King Caffeine Shad. Works great for smallmouth. You can really get longer casts with it because it weighs more, and it just has that unbeatable shimmy like a Senko does. And so that's why I like to throw that. And so those are the 3 that I'm going to throw. If I'm throwing it on a Baitcaster, I like a 7.2 Invoker Pro. Actually, it's an Invoker Limited series, and it's just a medium heavy fast action rod. It does a great job, especially if I'm throwing those big single hook baits. You can really drive that hook home. The line I'm going to throw it on is, if I'm on a Baitcaster, I'm going to throw 15-pound and to a 12-pound leader, and if I'm on a spinning rod, I'll go 12 to a 10-pound leader. And one of the other sneaky things that you can do that people often forget, and the reason why is if you're throwing your fluke and it keeps skipping out of the water and you're really trying not to have it skip out of the water, what you can do is you can add a small barrel swivel about 12 inches in front of your fluke. And I know a lot of guys do that, and you're like, John, that's not a secret. What you can do is put a bigger size barrel swivel on there. The more you upsize that barrel swivel, the heavier your bait's going to get, and it's going to sink a little bit faster. And so you can really start to fish that fluke down a little bit deeper. So if you're fishing over submerged grass, you want to fish it deeper under docks to really get that action underneath that dock, that's a great way to go about doing that. And it'll really change the sink rate, and it really changes how the fluke fishes too, because now you're diving it down instead of diving it up. And so that's kind of a game changer with those flukes. And don't exclude some of those goofy colors. You know, bright pink always does a great job. That Siren does an awesome job for smallmouth. That Siren chartreuse, it does a phenomenal job for smallmouth. But really, keep in mind this nose hook, because that's really going to change the game. It's how you, at your hookup ratio with a lot of these fish. But if you know, another great bait for covering water and catching those schooling fish, like like we use a fluke for, is a swim bait. And I'll have a video linked up here where I talk about how I change the game with some swim bait techniques and just how I go about rigging it. But thank you guys so much for watching. God bless, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.